Greetings, I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast for all the returning listeners, subscribers, and our very valued patrons. So glad to have you back. To those new to the channel, thank you for taking a moment to check us out. If you dig what we're doing, please hit like and, of course, subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way in promoting the channel. I also want to thank all of you that joined the Red Zone crew last night for another entertaining night of sports ball and ridiculousness. You know, the cure for your midweek doldrums. That episode is up now. YouTube tried to pull it down, but we fought back. We won. Just a brief reminder, that if you dig the wide variety of programming we provide here on TIR, want to make sure we can stay on the air, become a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber. When you become a patron or paid YouTube subscriber, you get early access to the audio-only podcast. You get the Crisis Papers. Issue 10 is up. Don't work yourself into a shoot. Raja Jackson, Trump, and kayfabe. And you get Champagne Room and Movie Night access for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You get the satisfaction that your small donation goes a long way keeping TIR on the air. Now, let's talk about why you're here. Environmental collapse. Growing up in the Bay Area, the environment was never an abstraction for me. Like many, I believed that recycling, consuming consciously, and choosing eco-friendly products, paper straws, reusable utensils, the Prius giving way to the Tesla, meant I was doing my part. These gestures seemed to signal the arrival of a green revolution. But our guest today, Malcolm Harris, reminds us that such individualized solutions obscure the deeper structural forces driving planetary destruction. If I'm honest, those gestures, the paper straws, the Prius, even the Tesla, were more about consumption choices than about structural change. They reassured me that the market could deliver sustainability so as long as I was a responsible consumer. That is precisely the myth that Malcolm Harris takes aim at in his new book, What's Left? He argues that such individual fixes and even state-sponsored green markets don't confront the deeper reality. Capitalism itself is organized to expand value no matter the planetary cost. What we often mistake for climate solutions are, in fact, the very mechanisms that keep us locked inside capital's destructive metabolism. His new book, What's Left, asks a double question: what remains to be done in the face of ecological collapse, and what remains of the left capable of doing it? Harris presents a dialectical study of the climate crisis, focusing on how capital's grip over production prevents humanity from redirecting its collective resources toward survival. As he notes, if Naomi Klein is correct that climate change changes everything, then the question is not simply whether we stop drilling new oil wells, but whether we can seize control of the very machinery that compels us to keep destroying the planet in the first place. In What's Left, Harris examines the ideology of marketcraft, the idea that governments can guide markets into greener, more sustainable outcomes, arguing that this logic entrenches capital's dominance by presenting the market as the only imaginable vehicle for survival. Marketcraft, in Harris's analysis, doesn't dismantle capitalism's compulsions. It repackages them in green rhetoric, making it harder for us to see beyond capital's greenwashing of the crisis. Equally important, Harris engages what Jose Carlos Martigui calls the Indian question: how struggles for a sustainable future intersect with indigenous sovereignty, land, and values. For Harris, the challenge is not only decarbonization, but whether ecological planning can take place without reproducing the dispossession and erasure of native peoples. If the left cannot reconcile climate strategy with indigenous values, the so-called green future risks repeating the old colonial order in new form. Now, to help me in this discussion is a returning guest on the show. He was recently on to talk about his latest book about Marx in America. Please welcome Professor Andrew Hartman.
Hey, Jason. Always a pleasure to be here. And your intro, as always, works me up into a sweat.
Hell yeah. And coming all the way live from a secret bunker somewhere hidden away from all of the negativity that may be bestowed upon him in Trump's America, please welcome Malcolm Harris.
Thanks for having me, Jason and Andrew. All the way from Philadelphia. Yeah.
You're in
A bunker from Trump.
Well, you can't say, because now Dr. Umar is going to come get you. Another good friend of ours is in Philadelphia, Paul Prescott, who writes for
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Paul?
Yeah, I think we met a long time ago.
Watch out for Paul, because he's also friends with Umar. To set you up. But I want to start off with one of the main focuses of the first half of your book, which is market craft. You define market craft as the state's role in structuring markets rather than passively intervening in them. How does this framing reveal the ideological work that sustains capitalism's dominance over climate policy?
Yeah, I mean, when I first wanted to write this book, my thinking was I would explain why to approach the climate crisis at all, you had to be a communist, that everyone had to be a communist. We had to smash the connection between value and life, or else there was no way to actually get at the real impersonal problem of capital accumulation that's driving this ecological crisis, that it's not just a question of pulling carbon out of the air. Mm-hmm. But the more I thought about that as a rhetorical strategy, the less it appealed to me. First, because I think it doesn't suggest that I really take the situation as seriously as I actually do. That if we're talking about a set of years, not, maybe a few decades, but not centuries, in terms of dealing with this problem, we're going to have to be organizing across difference, organizing for coherence across difference, with people who believe different things than us, that they're going to be people who believe a lot of different things and work according to their progressive strategies that we have to find ways to work alongside or in relation to. And to do that, we have to at least understand their strategies and take them seriously. And so market craft is the strongest version I could possibly give of the sort of liberal climate solution. Mm-hmm. So this is, if I take them as absolutely seriously as I possibly can. And I thought that was a good exercise for me, writing wise, rhetorically, but also intellectually, because I got to dig in and think like, okay, how do these people really think this is going to go? This isn't my philosophy, but how do they see it? And market craft is the term from this academic, Stephen Vogel at UC Berkeley. He's a political scientist. And the reason I like market craft is because it's like it's an anti-market fundamentalist understanding of what markets can be used for. He says like markets aren't like, some ancient god that we have to appease. They're not like the truth of humanity or something. They're not what all of our policies have to appeal to. They're a tool that groups of people can use to effectuate the things that they want. And if your markets aren't working the way that you want, then you have to structure them better. And that's not how I understand markets or capitalism, but as a philosophy that undergirds some sort of liberal climate strategy, I think it's a good way to understand the market. And I think it's better than some of what we've been hearing about, abundance, or that we just have to like build. Mm-hmm. And that we take the market's instructions for granted. That market craft says, look, we're going to wake up in capitalism tomorrow, not metaphorically tomorrow. I don't think that's true. Right? Metaphorically tomorrow, I think we're going to wake up in a very different system. But literally tomorrow, we're going to wake up in capitalism. And we're going to go to work, and we're going to have to find ways to use the things that we make tomorrow in the path to a better world, to make the better world out of what we start making tomorrow. And I understand that to a certain degree. And so in that chapter, I really explore that philosophy, which was tough for me as an anti-capitalist to do the 5 positive sections about that strategy. But I really tried my best, and there's some smart, well-meaning people who are working along those lines, whose ideas about, what a national investment authority would look like. What would it look like if we had the government democratic control over investment within our society. Well, that's a lot closer to what we think of as socialism than we might imagine that a sort of market craft strategy could get to. But there are intellectuals, working along those lines for precisely those ends, thinking about, well, how do we control green investment democratically as a society? And what I say in the book is that the best example by far of market craft and market craft strategy in the world is not the United States by a long shot, and it's not Europe by a long shot. It's the People's Republic of China, like by a huge margin. The huge leaders in structuring, using markets as a tool to produce the concrete tools that they need to achieve decarbonization, right? To build solar panels, literally, but also to plant trees, right? And this isn't happening under a command economy. It's happening under a mixed economy that uses a bunch of these sort of market craft tools. So that's my defense of people who say, like, well, did you devote a third of this book to saying why liberalism is great? I say, like, well, maybe, but only insofar as saying that, like, China is way better at it than the United States.
Yeah, Malcolm, given that I've been reading your work, I feel like since Occupy Wall Street, when you were writing for the New Inquiry, that was, in reading this book, probably one of the more surprising moves you made. I didn't expect a sort of popular front take from a devout communist on how to solve the crisis. I mean, was it difficult to get around to that? You kind of explained that this was potentially not how you went into it, but you came around to the idea that you had to take these three, and you can talk about the other ones, but these three different tracks to solving the climate crisis. You had to take them all seriously, because the moment we're in, if we are going to solve this crisis in not a century, but in a couple of decades, it's going to require several different tracks, or at least the three that you outlined. That seems like almost like not just a political, but an epistemological struggle.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough to, like, think through, and it's not something I'm used to doing. And for that reason, maybe it felt worthwhile, but it was also kind of fun because I got to put myself in different people's shoes. The middle strategy, so we got market craft as the first one. The middle one is public power, which is sort of a state socialism version, where if market craft is about structuring the markets to do the things you need to do, public power says, let's just do it ourselves. Let's build the public power that we need, literally, in publicly operated power plants, but also metaphorically in working class power, the power of the public sector, etc. And then the third strategy is communism. And I tried to be really strategic with the names of the first two strategies to try and, like, not trigger people, because I wanted people to, like, think through it really objectively and think, like, oh, what is this argument? And not be like, oh, is that me or not me? I feel like a lot of times, probably not just on the left, but definitely on the left, we get a little, like, identitarian about our political positions. It's about, like, oh, is that my position, or is it not? Is it like, is this a good argument or is it not? And we should, if that's your position, then you should be able to recognize it in good arguments, and you should be able to recognize other people's good arguments in their positions. It shouldn't be about, like, red team, blue team. Certainly not when we're thinking about, like, these kind of ideas. So I believe that to be true, certainly, but it's different from me writing these, like, sort of liberal arguments out myself. But so, yeah, in the third section, I gave up on that strategy and just called it communism, because that's what it's called.
You're like, they're going to publish this book anyway. Fuck them.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm not shy about what I believe, and I'm happy to explain it and to anyone who wants to talk about it. I believe
you're not like Andres Malm, where it's like, I think he had a book that during the COVID crisis was like a COVID war, communism, and the environment. It's like, okay, it's on Verso. I know who this is for.
Yeah, well, he worked. Yeah, and he's has a job in Sweden, and he's Yeah. I couldn't have written this book without the work of scholars like Malm, so I definitely don't want to look down my nose at him. I'm lucky enough to be able to take some of that work and try and explain it or build on it to a more general audience. And that's a privilege that I take really seriously. And so sadly, I feel like it was fun for me, but also challenge to think through these different strategies. But one of my hopes was that I could get sort of the intellectual end of liberals to sort of think through these arguments with me, and to think through this book and see themselves represented and see me treat them fairly and think through what that means and what it would mean if I'm, saying this other stuff or whatever. And that sort of hasn't happened. That was like I was basing on a public sphere that has changed a lot. I think the intellectual standards for the mainstream, but even our liberal and left liberal intellectual folks, our friends in the mainstream, has really degraded. And I didn't think about that so much in this book, but maybe I should have, and maybe I'll think about it more in the next book. But people are just not thinking that much. They're not excited to think very much, it doesn't seem.
Well, I was reading the book. It took me a while to get the ability to get to it, and I was very happy that it wasn't a door stopper like Palo Alto.
or like Karl Marx in America.
Yeah.
It's just regular book. There's like 200 something pages.
Yeah, Andrew was like, "Oh, I know this guy Malcolm Harris." I was like, "Oh, I know Malcolm. Oh, fuck, I know Malcolm Harris." Only halfway through this Palo Alto book, but I thought it was actually an easy read. I think
Right.
you did write it for kind of a more general audience. I think the abundance crowd would love this book because it would challenge a lot of what they hear constantly about, to your point, building.
Mm-hmm.
That's always the solution, right? We build more housing. Why don't we build more housing in California? It's like there's a lot of empty housing in California as well, all near each other. But we can get into that a little bit later. In what ways do you suggest that market craft narrows our political imagination?
Yeah, and none of the strategies on its own has all the answers, and that is very clear, and I think that's good. I started thinking about it as puzzle pieces.
Mm-hmm.
The puzzle pieces, if you've got puzzle pieces that are fully square or fully circle or something, they don't click together. They don't have anything to add. They need these inlets and protrusions, and they need to plug in together. And so each of the chapters for these strategies, I give 5 positive and 3 negative subsections about the strategies. 5 things where it's strengths or speaking for itself, and then 3 sort of critiques from other perspectives. And writing the market craft critiques was really easy, right? Writing the pro market craft stuff is hard for me because I'm not a liberal, I'm not a market crafter. But writing about why this doesn't work, writing about capital flight or capital, the tyranny by the capitalist class is very easy to explain. Well, you can ask capital to do this, but they are a class that operates in their own interest. And they recognize that it is not in their interest to suffocate themselves to death. Sorry, Mr. Keynes. They know someone who's read that book at least, right? They know what the strategy looks like, and they've shown themselves not just able to fight back, organize and fight back against a government strategy to suppress their control over the social planning prerogative, but a real paranoia about it, right? They start acting and organizing against this stuff before we get anywhere close to actually forcing them to do anything they don't like, at least for a long time now. And so we've been losing ground for a really long time. It's really easy to point to reasons why market craft doesn't work because it's been failing in really, really obvious ways for a long time. Which you could also say about the other strategies too. It's not a struggle to look for critiques of left-wing strategies. And part of what I had to do with this book was, instead of sort of taking them for granted and being well, we all know about all that because we all agree and we know that history, to really work through them one at a time and say like, okay, well, like, what does it mean? Like, where are our problems? So market craft definitely has a lot of them, and I think the main one that we know very well as anti-capitalists is the tyranny of the capitalist class. That they are an extra legal formation. They don't see themselves as subject to the law in the way that market craft imagines that capital as a social force is just like subject to the law, and we know that's not true. And so you need the supplement. If you don't have the recourse to public power, then capital will just withhold itself. They'll say like, well, we're going to hold out for 16% returns. And if you won't give us 16% returns for whatever investment, publicly minded or not, then we'll invest in Bitcoin. We'll flee offshore. We'll invest in buying a different set of politicians who will give us the policies we do want. We see all these strategies in operation. And so market craft has to have, and it's a failure of our liberal friends, is they haven't had a recourse to a left-wing strategy in the same way that the right has had a recourse to a far-right strategy. They haven't been able to point to them and be like, okay, well, if you don't want to deal with us, then you can deal with my friends over here who want to take over the state. Then you like really deal with like, they're not even Bernie Sanders. Like they're way worse than Bernie Sanders. And if you don't want to negotiate with like liberals, then you can deal with the socialists. And instead, they've suppressed any of those forces to their left to their own detriment, I would say. And we have I think those of us on the left have an analysis of why it hasn't been in liberalism's interest to suppress the left.
I think that's a really strong point. And if you think about in U.S. history, but also at a global level, when liberalism was at its heyday in terms of being able to positively affect people's lives, for example, during the New Deal, it had the example of the left as a negative example in the way in which you described. This is, of course, and I agree with this, Eric Hobsbawm's argument about the power of the negative example of the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious for you to build upon just sort of like a side comment you made a little bit earlier about the degradation of liberal intellectual life. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. And so I was searching around mostly in vain for a review of this book by a liberal. I don't know, maybe if that sort of added to your frustration because you're taking liberal ideas seriously and the liberals aren't taking left ideas seriously. One review I came across, I guess by a liberal, Adam Tooze, I don't know how we classify him in the New York Times, but I thought it was a fair review, except I was like totally mystified by his conclusion, and that is that none of this matters anymore because of Trump, because like the thing we have to worry about is just rebuilding our sort of civic institutions. Is that the best you've gotten in terms of reception from liberals? And especially, it seems to me, a strange contrast in how seriously you took the Abundance book in your Baffler review.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, it hasn't been widely reviewed, which is too bad. I mean, like, whether or not book reviews sell books or people actually read book reviews or whatever, like, I read book reviews. I'm interested in book reviews. I'm interested in what people think. And I was hoping that some liberals would engage with it. I don't think, Adam Tooze really engaged with it. I think that's a pretty like emotional piece. I don't know. I didn't really get what he was getting at there. And I think a lot of people were pretty confused at that one. And I'm not sure he can like stand by that, the argument that he makes.
It's a strange argument. Like
in regards to Trump?
Yeah, I mean, he makes this argument that had this book been published when Biden was president, we could all debate the merits of the three tunnels towards solving the climate crisis that Malcolm outlines. But since Trump's president, we only have to deal with the crisis. We're like in putting out the fire mode, and that all of that needs to be put aside. That was a problem.
Which everyone knows is like obviously not true, right? It's like everyone knows. It's like when there's an emergency, everyone knows you just focus on the emergency and you don't think like longer term at all.
Yeah.
And like longer term thinking is a like total luxury. And it's like everyone knows that's not true. Like, and this guy's a historian or whatever. I don't know. I think like blogging can fry your brain or whatever. Like,
Damn.
And in fact, a crisis might be the best time to.
Of course. I mean, well, that's like dialectical thinking, right? Is like, in fact, we must think very long term right now in the moment of crisis. That's not even like complicated. That's why everyone was sort of like, wait, is this like a joke? Like, that's like the opposite of what you're supposed to say. And I think like, he wrote that when he's a professor at Columbia, and Columbia was like under federal attack. And I get that, but I don't know. It's one of those things where I'm like, I was sort of, reminds me of why I'm glad to be a Marxist, which is that you can think long term and you don't have to be just reacting and reactive. And when people say like, oh, like, just is this book lose its relevancy, or do you like, is the argument change because Donald Trump got elected? And I was like Donald Trump had already been elected president once before. Like, why would I assume that Donald Trump wouldn't be elected before? Like, and I write about like the rise of right wing petro-capitalist politics in the book. Like, why would I assume America of all places would be exempt from that? I just don't. I didn't really get that. I think that seems like a projection from people who had based their own thinking on the idea that Joe Biden was going to win and we could just follow Biden's policy.
Well, then they
had
worry
things
about
under control or something. I don't know.
Right? It's like, when Biden wins, you have to worry about all this lefty stuff, and you can tell AOC to shut up. And there is no Mondale.
Well, but they also thought when Trump wins, that means you don't have to listen to any of the lefty stuff. I feel like there are some people who are like, we listened to this left wing stuff when Biden was president. Like, you were part of the coalition. We even did like, Black Lives Matter or whatever. We pretended we were police abolitionists for like 15 minutes when you guys were burning stuff down. We pretended we believed in heterodox economics for a little while when Biden like first came into office, which, like, by the way, is the reason that the US's response to the COVID crisis was so much better than so much of the rest of the world's, is because they did listen to these folks for a minute, partly because a couple like extremely rich foundations convinced them to, which is, I think, very funny that like, the Hewlett Foundation and the Jane family or whatever convinced the Biden administration to do a good economic response to the COVID crisis. And this has driven the right-wing econ liberal philanthropist complex completely insane that happened. That's like my underground theory about like what the abundance thing is really about, is that there are these like, liberal market fundamentalist foundation money or whatever that freaked out because the other guys won the first round of the Biden administration. But I think now that a lot of people saw Trump and be like, okay, we're all going to move 15 degrees to the right. That like the country is 15 degrees closer to the right than we thought. So like, actually we don't have to listen to anyone on the left anymore. Like, obviously that's a bummer for me as someone on the left whose job depends on getting a bunch of people to listen to me. But I think it's also wrong. Like I think it's showing itself to be wrong constantly, that the liberals have no answer to what's going on at all. They're like looking over at our paper like the kid who didn't do their homework before class. Because like, looking at some guy in Maine or whatever who's like an oyster guy and being like, oh, that guy's doing pretty good. Like, shit, what's he saying? Like, what do they look like about what he's saying? Like, they don't know how to do shit. And so moving 15 degrees to the right was not going to get them 15 degrees closer to the right answer. And it's funny to watch the electorate just like spring back out of nowhere, being like, oh, actually, no, we don't like that Trump stuff anymore. Like, never mind. We got confused for a second. Or like, we still just hate the Democrats. We don't like this like racism stuff. This is mean. And it's like assuming that elections really like tell you the truth about the population.
That's the problem. Yeah.
It is going to leave you like constantly going like this, because that's not what elections really do. And if you're a Marxist, you're not like looking for validation every 2 years, every 4 years to tell you like whether you understand the situation or not.
Mhm.
But it can be really destabilizing for people who are, right? And I think that like that's part of what happened. But it's too bad. Maybe when the paperback comes out, right? If they do a paperback, yes.
But I guess to dig more into the book, I'm really curious, not to give us 5 and 3 or whatever it is, 5 good things, 3 bad things, but what about the state sort of socialist solution, the state power solution? What's a good thing and a bad thing? I mean, I read the
Yeah.
book, but I like hearing you talk about it.
I'll talk about it. I'll give my pitch. So in the public power, one of the things I talk about a lot, maybe the best example that the U.S. has in terms of public power in this double sense of the power of public workers and publicly controlled literal electrical power system is this Tennessee Valley Authority. And the TVA comes around as a New Deal project where capital didn't find it worthwhile to electrify the American South, which was an underdeveloped area, you know, not just in relation to the rest of the country, but globally. It was a place that didn't have electricity. And capital said, look, that's a backwater. Like, we're not going to invest in putting up all of this electrical infrastructure. We don't think it's going to be worth it for us, which is totally wrong. People should read Brent Siebel's book about this, that capital found it very worthwhile once this infrastructure was actually implemented. But that's where FDR came in and said, look, okay, we'll start basically a government-owned company to just do this work, and we'll hire people to make the dams and build the power plants and build the infrastructure that we need to electrify this region. And the TVA still does that job to this day. And some of that infrastructure has lasted this long, partly because it was made with the public interest in mind as opposed to short-term profits. And that's the kind of thinking we actually need when we're building our, you know, medium to long-term infrastructure, especially when it comes to power and decarbonized power. The market craft is all well and good for what we're going to do tomorrow, but it's not an answer for like what we should do next week. In fact, it has a lot of wrong answers about what we should do next week. And public power is able to come in and think longer term about what are the things we value. You know, should we be using batteries which only last 10 to 20 years, or should we be building pumped storage hydro facilities, which I write about a lot in this section, that last basically forever and can store way more energy?
That was fascinating to me because I didn't know about the pump storage facilities. Can you tell us a little bit about what they are and how they work? I mean, you don't have to get into the minutia of it, but just kind of a lay description, which you actually do in the book, I think.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's cool because it's such an old technology and it's really easy to explain what it is. And it's like, you know, 100 years old, basically. I think it's 100 years old at this point. But it's also how the world stores almost all of its grid scale energy. So it's power grid scale amounts of energy. And the way that they do it is you have 2 linked reservoirs of water, and one is above the other. And when you want to store energy, when you've got excess energy to store, you use it to power pumps, to pump water from the lower reservoir to the higher reservoir. And then when you want energy that you want to access the stored energy, you let the water from this raised reservoir fall over a generator into the lower reservoir, and then you repeat the same cycle over again. And you can, you know, if with a mountain on a lake, you can store huge amounts of energy this way. And in fact, the world does all around the world. And a lot of places around the world are still building more of these facilities all the time. China is building a large number of pump storage hydro facilities. And the US hasn't successfully completed one in decades because we don't have this public power orientation towards building infrastructure. And capital is not particularly interested in pump storage hydro. It's like, and you can sort of understand why. It takes a lot of labor, it takes a lot of land. You have to work with a lot of stakeholders in that process. So there's a lot of permitting involved. But it's also really hard to amortize, right? If your batteries last 15 years, then you can say, all right, we're going to buy a battery. The energy cost is going to be this much. And below this cost, it's going to be worth building them, and above this cost, it's not going to be worth building them. And with pump storage hydro, it's really hard to imagine like what stored energy is going to cost in 100 years. You just like can't map it out. And if you can't map it out, then you just throw up your pencil and you say, all right, let's buy something else. Let's just like invest in Bitcoin or whatever. And so that's what they do. And so you don't have, and with that, you not only don't have the pump storage hydro facilities, you don't have the discourse around the technology. And so we get so much more conversation about batteries, grid scale batteries, that even in the United States don't store nearly as much energy as pump storage hydro does now, legacy pump storage hydro that's from like the 70s and 80s. Because we're not building new stuff. This is like 50-year-old installations that are still doing more than all these new batteries that we're installing all the time.
Yeah, I think you said it was 74 when it got built, right? Finally got completed.
Yeah, the one that I talk about in that section that the TVA built, and they're actually talking about expanding it now and maybe building a new one, which would be a welcome addition. But just like doing that, like one more addition is as much energy storage as you get from grid scale battery installations in a whole year, just this past year, which has been by far the biggest for the installation of these batteries in the whole country. And so like the numbers are way disproportionate, but you don't get the conversation around pump storage hydro because the conversation itself follows the capital. Even when you're talking about, green energy publications that are theoretically focused on this stuff, they're reporting on an industry. And so if the industry is not interested in pump storage, then they're not going to be as interested in it. It's going to be hard to find the coverage. And so people are just not going to know what it is. And so you find like, not just like person on the street or whatever, but people who like work in climate who don't know what pump storage hydro is. And that just blows me away every time. It's become for me the like one of the real like bugaboos of this book. It's sort of like driven me a little nuts. And when I start talking about this issue, I can sound a little crazy because I find it to be like just such a crime against a properly intellectual discourse that like if we're taking the problem seriously, then everyone should be talking about this. We should be thinking about how many of these we need to build every month or whatever. Then everyone should be knowing about this.
Well, you say that in the book that China, kept building and building and building, whereas we stopped.
Yeah, like if you wanted an example of how irrational the market or capitalism can be, and if you wanted an example of an empire in decline, this little issue is going to get you at the heart of both of those matters.
Malcolm, you write that green subsidies are like throwing a steak to a capitalist dog in order to get the system moving. What are the dangers of tethering climate action to capital's profit logic rather than democratic planning?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we talked about a few of them with the market craft section because ultimately you're not dealing with a dog, you're dealing with a class that has spent at this point, at least a century and a half pretty aware of itself and acting really strongly in its own collective interest. And so they're not just going to follow wherever you tell them to go. They think it's their job to tell you where to go. And this is a dog that has no problem biting the hand it feeds it, so to speak. And capital will absolutely attack society, even though society itself is the basis on which they exist in the first place. I mean, just look at the environment in the first place. I mean, when they say you can't have any market or profit on a dead planet, that doesn't stop these people, right? They're not thinking long-term strategically, ecologically, even though that ecological basis is the only possible basis for their profit making, as well as their like existence as people and the existence of their children as people, or whatever, because it's an impersonally structured system. And that's something I'm really clear about in the book, is that we're not dealing with bad leadership. We're dealing with a system impersonally geared toward accumulation in disregard for everything else. And so you can't let the market make choices for you, because the market's choice is going to be one thing and one thing only, which is to accumulate capital. And we've seen where that gets us. But just because and I don't want to say I had a problem when I was writing this book of constantly inserting the word democratic where I didn't necessarily belong, especially in that public power section, because I would constantly be saying, you know, under democratic control, this democratic auspices that. And what I really meant was public. I was really talking about the state, but the state didn't have to necessarily be democratic. And so when Leninists complained to me about like, well, where's my strategy? Where am I in the book? You're right in there. It's public power. You know, like, sorry, you're in the same one as the democratic socialist or whatever. But for this purposes of this exercise, you're talking about the state as the vehicle for solving this problem. But just because it's the state, and even if the state is democratic, I think a lot of us are pretty unimpressed with democracy's performance in these questions, right? So it's not a particular it's not a compliment to say you're more like the United States than China when it comes to addressing the climate crisis, right? And so it sounds very silly to be like, oh, well, of course you want to be a democracy. And I'm enough of a Republican, small r in the Marxist sense, to have some attachment to the ideas of democracy. But for the purposes of this book, I had to be careful not to over-insert it. But public control over investment, over your resources, doesn't necessarily solve the problem either. And there's a whole set of drawbacks I write about in that section as well, in addition to a whole nother communist strategy that I have to detail.
So what's the communist strategy? And then also, I read this in an interview as well, where you just kind of flat out said one of the problems with communism as a strategy is that we as commies trigger everybody else, I guess. Or I mean, you didn't use.
Oh no.
I got from that argument. Yeah.
We lost you for a second. Andrew.
We lost you, sir. You didn't use the word and you broke up.
Am I?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like one of the problems with communism is that it triggers so many people. Like commies trigger us, trigger everyone. Everyone thinks so negatively of communism that's like in itself a sort of structural problem.
Yeah. So the communist strategy for me is about the reorganization of society. The social metabolic order is one of the ways I talk about it, on the basis of from each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. And that's a older theory, older strategy than Karl Marx, for sure. I had a fun conversation at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco with the dean when we were talking about the community of goods that Jesus Christ was all about communism. So communism is an older story. This isn't just about Karl Marx. And climate, I think, is one of those needs that value-based systems have a really hard time understanding and addressing. And Jason, you talked about this at the beginning of the show, that right now value-based systems will try to sell us decarbonization as if it was something that we could want or need in the way that we want or need other commodities, other products, other values at an individual level within the capitalist system, in the way that we might want shoes. Shoes is one way I've been thinking about it. And that like between the three of us, how many shoes we need in a value-based system, and not just capitalism, but any sort of system that's going to be apportioning things based on value. That's going to depend on all sorts of variables. It's going to try and understand the whole world in this question of how many shoes the three of us need. It's going to depend on how much our labor can command on the world market. It's going to be about how much labor the people who make shoes commands on the world market. It's going to be about international trade. It's going to be about our supposed revealed preference between the three of us, how much we want to work for the shoes we want, the quality of the shoes we want, all, a million questions about the kind of shoes that we want. And at no point or we look down and say, all right, between the three of us, we got 6 feet, and we probably need 1 shoe per foot. And that's the way that we need decarbonization. We need decarbonization that we need shoes for our feet, right? We need decarbonization because we're human beings that can only live within a certain temperature range. And right now the Earth is overheating based on the overaccumulation of carbon in the atmosphere. All right, we don't need it because I want it more than you want it, and like my money, I have more money than somebody else has, and so it's worth less to me, so I can buy more. Whatever. Like that's not how we need decarbonization. That's not an accurate depiction of our collective need. And so only under a system or a social metabolic order, like a communal one or communism, can we think about that collective need as a species need, as a species basis, to say we all need to live in a world that is between these temperatures, and this is how we're going to achieve it, and we're going to achieve it according to people's abilities. But we all need it, and we all need to figure out a way to do it, even at the cost of a whole bunch of other things, right? Even at the cost of our comfort, even at the cost of our national wage differentials, even at the cost of our current way of being, at the cost of any number of different things, we need it regardless. And a communal perspective is able to make that kind of decision. And you can see why that might not be popular, right? And so one of the drawbacks that I write about communism is that we're broke, landless, and unpopular. We don't have stuff. We don't have a lot of power. We don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of leverage within the system by definition, right? We don't own anything. We don't own any land. We don't have a power base within this world. We don't have a bunch of territory. And we're telling everyone to like destroy their lives, basically. And their lives, people's lives, even if they don't like them very much, even if they're not happy or satisfied with their lives are how they get from one day to the next, right? And if so, you're telling everyone, part of our slogan is destroy the world, destroy your lives as you know them. We shouldn't be surprised that people don't like jump to join us, right? That people aren't like, oh yeah, definitely we should do that. And I write that maybe communism only seems rational to some folks, or most folks even, in the mad light of an unexpected fire, right? When things seem like there's no way to go back, does this sort of communal perspective where you torch your whole way of life seem appropriate or reasonable. But the good news for those of us who are communists is that there are more and more of those unexpected fires, for better and worse, every day. That's more and more true, that you can't go back and that there is no back to rely on. And I believe that to be the case. And that's one of the reasons I am a communist.
Did
you want to add anything to that, Andrew?
That was well put. I was going to ask, where I was going to ask you to make the case for degrowth communism in the debate with eco-modernism, and I think you just did that.
Yeah, and that's the reason I don't use the word degrowth in the book.
You do not?
I don't, and I don't consider myself a degrowther or whatever. I'm a communist. I absolutely, I don't think I need a modifier for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you talk about some of the aspects of degrowth policy, some of the ideas associated with degrowth, I think flow naturally from being a communist. That they're implications of being a communist. Are we going to, use more cement? No, I think a communist perspective will tell you pretty quickly that we are not going to use a bunch more cement. That we're not going to try and solve our problems with cement. And I talk about that a little bit in the book, that how ecologically ignorant that is, and that we need to be ecologically thoughtful. Also, just as a Marxist, the valorization of growth I find kind of excruciating. Marx is very clear that the growth of capital is the immiseration of the working class. That's a very distilled syllogism of a Marxist understanding.
It's a central tenet.
Absolutely central. I mean, and you can unfold it from any Marxist understanding, right? that's why I think it's like Value, Price, and Profit that he actually says it in, which is an underrated text in my personal opinion, where he like develops this best, I think. But it really like it flows from any Marxist understanding. You have to understand that like capitalist accumulation means the relative immiseration of the working class. Like there's no way that those things can be disassociated from each other. And so when people say like I'm a pro-growth socialist, I'm like, well, like you mean like grow more trees or whatever? Like, yeah, I'm with you. Like we need to like growing the amount of love in the world. Like, yeah, true. Like, yeah, we should like grow like growing the amount of train routes in North America. Like, definitely. But like, you mean grow like capital accumulation? Like, no, you can be a pro capital accumulation socialist. Like, what does that mean?
So I think a skeptic might argue, and this isn't me, but a skeptic would argue that you're making a sort of heighten the contradictions argument, to which you could easily say, okay, so maybe making a heighten the contradictions argument in the 1930s is not the best argument to make. But the climate crisis, like, is there a better exemplification of heightening the contradictions, in the sense that that's all we have are these contradictions, and they're going to continue to heighten unless we completely and utterly change.
Yeah, and that it's impersonal, right? It's not like we can choose to heighten them or not heighten them. It's like, this is what I wrote actually about left accelerationism, back when leftists were still talking about accelerationism, before the right has totally co-opted or maybe correctly opted. What's it called when you co-opt like your own ideas? But when we were having this conversation about left accelerationism, and I compared it to taking a picture with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Like, you can take a picture where it looks like you're pushing down the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but like you're not actually pushing down the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Like, technosocial acceleration is happening because of capital accumulation, and capital accumulation is continuing because we live in a capitalist society. And so you're not going to like make that happen more. That's not under your command or whatever. The question is how you organize under those conditions.
Your metaphor game is strong, Malcolm.
Yeah, that's why they let me keep writing these books.
It's all the Bay Area hip hop. That's what it is.
Yeah, right. Zion I is how I learned all my metaphors.
Well, sadly, he's no longer with us.
Really? Wait, when did that happen?
COVID.
Yeah.
He actually
fuck
away from COVID. Yeah. True story.
Yeah,
didn't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but
yeah, that's fucked up. Someday we're going to take an actual account of all the people we've lost to COVID, and people are going to be like, wow, that's horrible. Like,
it is a lot more than people think.
I know it is a lot more than people think. And I think if people actually thought about what's been taken from them, not just as individuals, but as a society, they would take this pandemic way more seriously.
Which is the final question as we come up to an hour that I do want to ask you. I have written about the dark reality that we are facing in this current moment, where capital is trying to deal with the management of surplus people who cannot contribute to the economy. You mentioned briefly in your writing the closure of public spaces and anti-camping laws.
Mm-hmm.
How soon do you think we are from a solution to this population? You kind of, like you said, you mentioned it kind of briefly, being the dying with dignity as an option, or what we see in Canada with things like MAID. Because sadly, I did work in the Bay Area with the unhoused population, and I felt that was maybe 30 years down the road that we would adopt like Canada and lots of Europe. Now, maybe a little sooner. What is your opinion?
Yeah, you gave me like a scared taste in my mouth, like just hearing that question. Yeah, they kill people every day. So the idea that the state will start killing unhoused people or homeless people, I think they've started that solution, and they know that to be their solution, right? They don't have enough beds for people.
No.
When they bust up a camp, like, they know they don't have enough beds for people. and they know that camp is keeping people relatively safe. This is something I always try to make, like, the argument to people on the left, that like camps keep people safe. Like, people camp and sleep near other people because it keeps them safer than camping alone. And when you bust up camps, you put people in more danger. That like camps are a solution to the problem of being alone on the street. And we need to like think about them as something that it's our job to defend on the left. And some people have lost sight of that a little bit in a way that I find frightening, but it's always been part of my politics, both intellectually and in my political activity, that we need to make that part of our job, because it's like you can't. It depends what city you're in, right? If you're in Chicago, like that's happening tonight, right? And if you're in Memphis, it's happening next week. And I live in Philly, and I don't know what week it's happening, but I know it's going to be one of these weeks. We're going to wake up one day, and they're going to try and be rounding up everyone who doesn't have a home. And not to put them somewhere nice, not to put them somewhere where they've got a plan to take care of people, and they're using the infrastructure that they're building for immigration, that they're building on the backs of immigrants, as I think the prelude to what they're looking to do with socially undesirable people as a whole. So I don't think it's going to look much like Canada. I think it's going to look more like RoboCop. Whatever, you know, I think it's going to look more like what we're seeing now. But maybe, I mean,
I think it'll look more like, I think, you know what I think it's going to look like? You know how they have all these, I don't know if they have them where you guys live, maybe not where Hartman lives in Bloomington, but they have these blood donation places that they have big billboard ads all over East Oakland, right? It's just like vampire centers. In real time. I think it's going to look a lot like that, where there'll be some sort of incentive to do it. And as we look at addiction as an uncurable disease, that will be one of the there's two factors for me that are going to be the reason why this gets sped up. And one is, can't solve addiction with the magic bullet theories, right? Harm reduction is not a magic bullet answer to solving addiction. Come at me with all of the comments you want to, but it's not a one size fits all solution. It's part of a bigger blanket of things that would be needed, right? And as we want to just build big walls to throw them behind, you know, I don't know the last time you've been to Oakland is, or like Emeryville area, where they were like, we just put tough sheds. That's what everyone needs. A little tiny house. You wouldn't want to live in one, but we'll just give these people a tiny house. We'll give them a roommate that they don't fucking know, because why not? Fuck them.
Much like jail, right?
Yeah. It's just like jail, but you can leave, and that's better, right? And then no one's got to see you guys do all the homelessy shit that you people do that we don't want to see.
And then we'll lock up that facility at 10 o'clock, and if you're not there, then
then someone else will get your shitty room that's as big as a dry.
And then it's suddenly people aren't behaving right, so then we're not going to open it today, and then you're just in a camp.
Or you're going to have problems that spill out into the non-homeless world, and that is a reality, right? There's a reality of people that exist in an illegal economy that it's not a cheery place. So as those problems spill out, no one's going to want it next to them. Like, I've never met the person that says, you know what my neighborhood needs? More places that people can shoot up. That's what I want.
That's what these techno assholes think, when they see someone in a doorway in the Tenderloin or whatever, who's strung out, and they say like, oh, that's a homeless person. We need to round up and kill all the homeless people. And first of all, they don't know anything about that person necessarily, what their life was like, and what they're doing this week and what they're doing next week, whatever. But that's also not what the average homeless person's life looks like. And like, the average homeless person is employed, and the average homeless person in the Bay Area, in the cities that these people are living in, is employed working in some way for these people, for the overclass of these cities. And so like I swear, another metaphor I've used for these people, I think it's in Palo Alto, is they're like, maybe it's not even in there, but it's like the portrait of Dorian Gray, where they're like, everything is great, but if we just got to get rid of this stupid portrait, they're like, it's like, you're the one who were causing this.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you can't get rid of the problem? You are the problem. Like, people are poor because you're rich, asshole. Like, and killing them won't solve the problem. Then who are you going to find different poor people to make you rich? To serve you, to deliver your burrito. And delivering that burrito, again, is not just about like them getting lunch. That's where their wealth comes from, is the company that runs the delivery burrito platform or whatever. They get rich off these people in so many ways, and they live rich off these people, and they've made it impossible for them to find stable housing because of that situation. So they are their own problem, and they have found it surprisingly hard to solve themselves.
There you go with your Marxism again.
Yeah, see, it's you can always unfold it, right?
Well, I don't know what I haven't been to Bloomington or even that region in like almost 10 years, so I don't know what it looks like now.
You're missing out, Jason. You are missing out. I mean, we have, even though we are a modest community of 150,000 people, we had a homeless encampment, and they're doing exactly as you described. They're building like on top of a sort of cement platform, little tiny houses.
No way.
The solution is always, if I put you away and I can't see you, and we're seeing a return to this, right? With California, certain laws are being passed where now if you're displaying certain behaviors, you can be forced into a facility. Again, that's a conversation we can have, but there's a reason why people fought against doing that for a long time.
Absolutely.
But if I put you up somewhere where there's walls and you do all whatever shit you want to do, then I don't care, as long as it doesn't spill over into my life. And what we're seeing now, in a way that I've never seen in my 48 years of life, is this stuff spilling out into the suburban hinterlands. Like, Malcolm, you're from the Bay. The last time I drove out to the Pittsburgh area, and I'm talking about Pittsburgh and the Bay, of course. Sure. I was shocked to see homeless encampments on the side of the 680, because this is the East County of Contra Costa, man. This is where all the people with a couple bucks and working class jobs live. There's factories out. There's refineries out here that people work in, but that's how far homelessness has gotten kind of everywhere. So I'm not shocked that has gotten even to where Andrew and Teray are. It's just, my fear is that we see, and I say we as a society, not we as the three people on the screen, as this population that can't produce value. And you're just, you're a broken person. How do we get rid of you in a way that everyone will agree with? And one of the conversations I hear in liberal circles, you can read about, is a kind of growing frustration people have with quote unquote mentally ill.
Right. And the homeless, it's once again this sort of anti-intellectualism that they knew for a long time, at least they pretended to know, that like, oh yeah, actually that like that's not how homelessness works. And this caricature of what an unhoused person is as a like someone who's unemployable and is a drain on society, whatever, is just demographically incorrect, right? It's statistically incorrect that they are people who produce value. They produce value and don't get enough of a share of it in order to be able to reproduce themselves under standard conditions within the society. And that super exploitation, right? That situation of being super exploited is not uncommon around the world these days, right? If you read like Mike Davis, Planet in the Slums, right? This is a globally sort of standard position, there are more people who are living in that kind of situation than are living in the classically proletarian position of the refinery worker that you're talking about. Even if working in a refinery in the East Bay is not like the best job of all time, it's a classically like proletarian gig in terms of what your leverage is over production, your relation to production, and you're going to get a better share of that usually than someone who's living in this, by definition, if someone who's super exploited. And so we could see like homelessness in America sort of endemic to service work, right? To super exploited labor that so much of this economic system is reliant upon. And like that investment in these speculative fortunes are based on so much of this super exploited labor. So I think these capitalists will constantly be running into, and liberals too, will constantly be running into walls, running themselves in circles, running into their own tail, however you want to think about it, trying to solve their problems, not realizing that they themselves are the problems for a lot of these cases.
That is why I really enjoyed the book. I think it is an intellectual exercise that the average person that probably doesn't read books like this could pick up on. So wherever you guys are watching or listening to this show later, there are links in the description to pick up What's Left by Malcolm Harris, and there's links in the description to get Andrew Hartman's book.
That one's over here too somewhere.
So we got it all. We got all the links for all the books.
And
go back and listen to any of Andrew's appearances on the show, but definitely listen to his most recent appearance where we're talking about Marx and America.
The conclusion, or maybe the thesis of both books, is a system that produces the super rich is the problem.
Yeah, we're against it.
We're totally.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone
Jason.
for tuning in too.
Thank you very much for joining me again. It's not very often I get to have a Bay Area person and a Bronco fan and a Maple guy on the show all at once.
All at the same time.
All at the same time.
Glad to hold it down.
Birthday. It's my birthday. Malcolm, what do you got working on next? Before we go?
My next book will be called Convenienced. So look out for that one in like a year and a half or something.
Another doorstopper.
We'll see. It'll be probably between the length of my last two books.
Your editor is just like,
just a large range.
Time for this guy again. The Harris guy wrote another.
It's breezy. It reads quick.
Andrew, what are you working on?
So I'm writing probably another doorstopper, a history of anti-imperialist thought across U.S. history. So like, I think I'm going to call it Empire and Its Discontents. I haven't decided on that yet, but
nice.
Given that I'm just a slow working academic who has to teach a bunch of kids and actually enjoys teaching kids, it's going to be more than a year and a half.
He gets to think about his stuff longer.
Well,
there's that. Yeah.
We'll blame tenure. But thank you guys. Thank you, Andrew.
See you.
Thanks,
See you
Jason.
next time.
Thank you, Malcolm. We're going to go into the champagne room, have a discussion that I want to get into with you guys. Again, wherever you guys are watching or listening to the show, there is links in the description to Malcolm's book and to Andrew's book. Thank you guys for all the comments. What say you about what Malcolm and Andrew and I had to say? Let me know in the comments. And on that note, we are out.